So, welcome to Women at the Forefront of Payments, where we spotlight inspiring women who are shaping the future of payments and fintech. And through these conversations, we explore their journeys, challenges, and insights on driving diversity, inclusivity, and innovation in the industry. And today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Eline Blomme, Chief Strategy and Product Officer at Acquire.com. Previously, she held senior roles at TrueLayer and Worldline, shaping open banking and global e-commerce offerings. And she holds an MBA from Warwick Business School. So, Eline, it's great to have you here. How are you today?
Great. Lovely to speak to you again, Melisande.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's good to catch up today. Hey,
Absolutely.
let's kick off our conversation around representation and inclusion in the industry, because women, and particularly in leadership roles, continue to be underrepresented across the payments and fintech space. So, from your perspective, what advice would you offer to women navigating their careers and striving to make their mark in the workplace?
I think there's four things that I think are quite interesting for women to follow, or at least when I look back at my own career. And I think the first one is to own your own career path. I think it's quite important to be proactive instead of reactive. For nobody, and literally for nobody, it will be clear where you land until it actually happens. I think when I look back at my own career, where I started, there is no way that I could have said that I would be doing what I was going to do, which was move from sales into product and move from Belgium to London. I literally would have had no idea that that was going to happen. But I think it's taking opportunities along the way, which often come from taking ownership of something that you might not necessarily have clearly in your job description, and also taking quite often a bit of risks. So I think that's a really crucial part when I look back on some of the choices that I made, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And also the risk part, I think, is a good part, eh?
It is, because you take every time you make a jump into something else, you take a risk because you don't know if it's going to be better or if it's going to be worse. And I had the case where sometimes I thought, oof, this was worse. It would be way much comfortable to stay in the same position, or it was a challenging role. But I think every time the point is that you have to think what you're going to take away and what you're going to learn from it. And if you live by those rules, even when it gets really hard, you're thinking, okay, I'm learning. At least I'm learning. I'm learning to deal with difficult situations. So it makes you not regret things, but see it more as a positive, an opportunity. I think another element that I really want to give as an advice, because I think that's also a very personal one, is on how you deal with your choice of having kids or not having kids, and when you want to have kids. So when I look back, I knew with my husband, we wanted to have kids, but what we didn't know when exactly. And I think with work and being, I would say in the beginning I was ambitious, but then I think it just kind of naturally progressed every time. You've It was quite hard for me to say, oh, I'm going to have kids now, because you always feel like it's the wrong time. And so I remember quite a lot of pushback on when I was going to start that date. And then from a personal story, I was in Brazil once for a payment conference, and somebody told me in that journey, you really should have kids, do it if you want it, do it now. We had a bit of like a conversation that was quite informal after a couple of drinks. And it's so true. I feel forever grateful to that person for have given me the push that I needed at that time to start it. Because if you look at having kids, it's such a short moment in your whole career that you're not there. And that indeed, somebody else could take your position. It can have a big impact on your career. But having a child, it's, on your whole life, it's much more impactful and much more valuable. And you will recover from anything that happens during that period, might the worst come. But I think I've been quite lucky in that regards, that it, for me, always has turned out quite well. I think the other thing is around, I have quite a lot
Good
of
question, Eline. Sorry to interrupt, but how advanced were you in your career when you had that discussion with that other woman in Brazil, and she pushed you? Were you like 5 years in your career, 10 years? Like, where were you?
No, I was in my 30s, I remember, and I just had taken on the switch from moving Actually, I was not yet moved yet to the product role. I was still into the sales department, but I was leading the global e-commerce sales, account management, and business development teams. And that, it was quite a challenging role because you travel all around the world. You go to, in our case, quite often you went to Brazil offices, but also to the US and other locations, quite remote. So things that are maybe not as easy to do when you have a child. But I think the point is it always sorts out itself afterwards. I did move to product after, which made the travel much less. However, when I had a child and she was 1 year old, I went every week to Amsterdam. So it wasn't like, it wasn't, there was still quite a bit of travel involved. Now I'm quite lucky because it's just me in the UK. But if I would get the opportunity to travel again, I would. And you just sort it out later. I think I am a person that doesn't think that far ahead often because I'm quite impulsive and I do things on the spot. And I think that's basically mainly to my benefit in a way, because it makes me not worry that much in advance. On the other hand, I think for kids, it was a decision that was a really long time in my head that I didn't act upon. So yeah, I think the other thing that I find quite interesting is that I have many friends in quite senior roles at certain companies that have been there for quite a while, and they feel like having a child or having a second child makes them or means that they have to stay in that role. They cannot move to a new company and then have that child because they feel like that would be not okay. I can tell you, I think that's also wrong. From a personal experience as well, I think I joined Acquired and I got pregnant. And I'm going to have a baby in July. So I'm pregnant right now. And everybody was like, great, it's fine. There's not a problem. I think the value that you bring yourself or the value that you bring is bigger than the fact that you're going to be out for a certain period of time.
Just for a couple of months. It's not forever. It's just, yeah.
Exactly. I think that's the point. The only thing that I think is more problematic is the fact that there's still such a big difference between the maternity and the paternity leave between man and woman. If it could be 100% equal, I think then, because no employer loves when you leave because, you're going to be gone for a couple of months. You have to find a solution. But I think the point is if we can make it 100% legal from a regulatory point of view, I think then always for any woman, it's going to be much more easier to say, I want to have a kid at work, which I think most people will not say until they're actually pregnant, if that makes sense. So yeah, my experiences so far has been just do it. It will sort itself out. And if your employer doesn't like it, well, that's their problem. You'll find a better one.
Okay, so be proactive, and also regarding your family planning, don't wait. Just, stick to your own plan.
Exactly. I think another element is around finding a mentor in your journey. So for me, that was quite important when I moved from the sales towards the product area. At Worldline back in the day, we were doing a lot of acquisitions, which created a lot of movement in terms of positions, but also opportunities. And I always tended to be a salesperson that tried to go maybe a little bit too deep in product for what I was supposed to do, building new value propositions, building new products specifications into the roadmap. And from there, I had a mentor. We never named it as such. You don't always need to name it because it might make it a bit awkward, if that makes sense. But I had somebody that I had a good relationship with in the sense that we always would have conversations about the payments. And this person was a chief architect. So we would talk about the payments journey. And he was the one saying, look, when the newest acquisition of Ingenico came up, he was like, I think you should really go into the product area. I think you should do that because of your interest in what you've shown in the past. And I think it helps as well when you make a move like that to do it in a company where you already have proven yourself a bit. And this is where that mentorship relationship, I would say, has helped me a lot because that person advocated for me inside the organization, that I was a great person for, being that VP of product for global e-commerce merchants, but also pushed me a little bit because I knew that person and because their trust in me gave me more trust, if that makes sense, to take that step. And then a last advice I would give is that But that's, I think, in general, like people like to give a lot of free advice sometimes that I don't always appreciate. In the sense, like if I didn't ask for it, don't tell me. But I think when I was moving from Belgium to London, it was to work in a specific segment in the payments industry, which didn't have many females in there. And I was told by a woman, "Oh, I don't think you should operate in that world. It's a very male-driven world. It's not going to be good for you." And to be fair, she was saying it to protect me. It was not because it was definitely not badly intended. But for me, if somebody tells me I cannot do something, I think, I mean, ask my parents, my counter reaction is going to be, "Oh, of course I can do it.
So why not? Yeah.
Improve it." And actually, it ended up being a great decision because it was, I had really good results, and actually it helped my career propel even faster, more than anything else. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Cool story, Eline. Hey, if we go back to where you were early in your career, what challenges did you face in that time, and how did you overcome them?
To be honest, I think that was the hardest. When you talk about being a woman, I think when I was at the earliest stage of my career, that's when I felt the most disadvantage of being a woman, more than maybe now. I think when you are younger, you get, I mean, especially I did. I'm talking about, the years 2012 to 2018. I would consider myself young a bit longer, but I think those periods was that was the worst. Is I got so many inappropriate comments. It didn't really help in the industry I was working in because I was working. I started my career at a beer company, so beer company was much more male driven, I would say, than financial services, especially because you're working in parts of the brewery, some of like the sales processes. And I remember one of the worst things that happened to me, and honestly, like to this day, it almost traumatized me, is I was at some point working in the sales department for this beer industry, and I had good results. And when it came to the feedback moment, what I had heard is that when my performance was being discussed was that it was good because of the fact that I was a young woman and not because of the fact that, I just had a good strategy. And when they compared me against the male, that was the reason to give a better rating to that male than to myself. And I only heard it, to be honest, 2 years after I had left, from somebody that was in that like review committee or salary review or performance review committee. And I thought that was so unfair. But at the same time, I was kind of happy to know that because I never understood why I didn't get a better rating there, if that made sense. But it also made me realize like how unfair it is. Like it doesn't matter if you're just purely on the database, you have better results. People will always, try to attribute it to something else.
It's basically your looks. It was not so much your skills. You didn't work so hard for it. It just came to you because you were blonde and blah, 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 blah. No, that's horrible.
Exactly. And the thing is, I was embarrassed about this person saying that about me. Like it was my fault. You know what I mean? Like, which, I don't know, like, at least with the whole Me Too thing, I feel like people I don't think this would happen anymore. And also I heard in this specific beer industry and so on, they've progressed quite far as well. Because I felt like there it was almost normal. People would say these things. I think at least in financial services, it would be more hidden. But there it was like, it was just out there, like in the
open.
Yeah, and like making jokes that you felt like so inappropriate, but where you felt like if I say something about it, people are going to say that I'm like, I cannot take a laugh, I cannot take a joke. But in those days, oh my God, it was every day. It was horrible. So yeah, but I think that performance related part was probably where it hit me the worst, because that's where I felt, okay, there is, they always talk about glass ceiling, but this is like a different kind of glass ceiling that you hit upon, which is like, okay, you cannot do anything right even because it will still be attributed towards your looks, and you being a woman. So I think that was a tough start, I must agree. But the thing is, I only knew it 2 years after I left there. That's when I had like an informal breakfast with another woman, a female leader friend that I made there. And that's when I heard that. So I was kind of also happy that I understood it at that point, because I never really understood, why that other person had a better performance review. But now at least I knew, just the guy had a pick on me. Like I couldn't do anything wrong, because otherwise they would have not said something like that to discredit my performance, if that made sense. And then I think the other point is what I also found a little bit hard, and I still struggle with that, is when you're a woman, often certain characteristics are considered, you're being viewed a little bit different. I give you example. One of the things that I sometimes heard, especially when I started, was that I was emotional. So I remember one of my performance reviews, they were like, yeah, you're doing great, but you're a bit emotional. Probably I do get sometimes a bit emotional, if that makes sense, in the sense that I'm quite passionate or so on. But I feel like for a man, it probably would be called passion. For me, it was called emotions. So yeah, I think that was another one that I struggled with, where I felt it was not always fairly treated. On the other hand, maybe sometimes I was too emotional, if that makes sense, because maybe I care too much, or I could have expressed it differently, and I did learn from that. But yeah, sometimes I felt like it's a word that you use because I'm a woman, so yeah.
It's a tricky word, because it basically means like you're emotional, you can't control your emotions, you're going off rails. It's something to be really aware of. And indeed, for the other side, it could be you're passionate and you're really fanatic on things.
Exactly.
And
being aggressive or just being direct. I think that's another one that's one that I struggle with. Whereas it just gets viewed different. Although I think these things have improved, but again, I think with years of time, my confidence levels have just increased so much more that I don't even worry about what people would think about it. So if you think I'm emotional because I say that this is not right or whatever, or like speak out quite heavily, but I do understand there is a balance there in how you display your passion, if that makes sense.
Hey, what habits or mindset shifts have helped you to grow both professionally and personally during, let's say, the last 10 years?
So I must say the last one that I must say, so what I learned really in the last 2 years is around setting boundaries and balance. When I moved from WorldLane to TrueLayer, it was going from like, big corporate environment into like startup, scale up environment. Yeah, I would say quite dynamic, competitive environment. Very, you had to work very hard. And I think in some ways I lost myself a little bit, in the sense that I would be on Slack constantly all the time, because I felt that was expected, and that's on me, that's not on the company, but I felt like that was expected. I was working weekends, I was working, when people put in meetings, I just didn't have boundaries. I didn't say, oh, you know what, if you set a meeting at 8, that means that I kind of have to have a problem because I have nursery that I need to do the drop off on those days, or just 8 is really early. Like, I don't like to be in the office by 8. I'm stressed by the time I wake up to get there by 8, if that makes sense. And the same thing with the evenings. So when I stopped at TrueLayer, I took a bit of time to go and travel, and I had to reset myself a little bit in terms of regaining a little bit of like calm. I wouldn't say I was burned out, but I think I definitely was at a stage where I was like, okay, I traveled in those days and so on. I needed a bit of me time, and I don't want to be in that status again where I need that time in order to reset myself. So now I set very clear boundaries. So when I started at Acquired, I was like, no meetings before 9:30. If there's a meeting at 9, I'm a recurring one, that is. let's not do it. And now actually everybody's moving the recurring meetings to 9:30 because it makes sense. Because if you check, people don't want to have a meeting at 9 in their calendar in a face-to-face on a Monday. Just let people a little bit more time to adjust. And I think everybody's like agreeing. So I think it's about setting your own boundaries for yourself. And obviously there can always be exceptions, but I think the point is that you're allowed to say that. It's really not a problem. People don't respect you for, not having boundaries. People respect you because you put your own boundaries there. So I think that's an important one. Then another one that I learned is to not be scared about taking decisions. This is also something that I learned over time, is like your confidence in order to take decisions, how much information that you need before you take that decision. And it's also something actually I learned very much from another colleague who has like very high confidence levels, somebody that I met over the years, and he always had such high confidence level. And I always be like, how can you have such high confidence levels? We were talking about, like a topic totally different from payments, that we don't know anything, a medical topic. And he always had such high confidence levels when he explained his point of view on it. And I always admired him for it, because I thought to myself, oh, I always like need to be a bit more careful before I take a decision, or I wouldn't dare to make like a really black or white point of view about stuff where I don't necessarily have all of the knowledge. But I think that actually, and especially in our world, which is more like the startup world, scale-up world, that's where you need to take decisions without necessarily having all of the information, and to be a bit more comfortable to be wrong. But also there, I find that even if you have taken that decision, you're almost never really black or white wrong, if that makes sense. Like it's really not like that. So I think that's definitely something that I've learned by seeing from somebody else over a long period of time, that I was like, okay, I'm going to be far more decisive now when I pull through. And even when I see, it was maybe not the right decision, stick with it, because it's just another point in time that it might go down a bit, but it might convert. It's fine.
Exactly. Also to make progress. Is that what I hear you saying? Just
because it was somebody saying, it's like, it's maybe not my favorite animal, but sharks, they have to continue swim, because if they stand still, they die. I think it's the same for startups. You need to move, you need to advance, so you need to keep on taking decisions. I think it's the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. You can always, change a decision or say, okay, this didn't work. Yeah, let's take another direction, but at least you're still moving. No, I totally get it. And Eline, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, and also for sharing your personal story. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories in women at the forefront of payments. So until next time, thank you.